Okay, now we start this event. Good morning, everyone. It's time to start this event named Japan's Initiative Toward Carbon Neutrality. Thank you for participating in this event today here, Japan Pavilion, hosted by the Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry Japan. And I am Koji Takahashi from METI, and I'm serving as MC of this event. And in this event, we will show how Japan will achieve carbon neutrality and contribute to decarbonization in the Asian region through speeches by Japanese government and business leaders, as well as discussion among government officials. First of all, as the first part of this event, I'd like to invite Mr. Minami Ryo from METI to present Japan's policy toward carbon neutrality. Mr. Minami is Deputy Commissioner for International Policy on Carbon Neutrality and Director General for Energy and Environment Policy, Agency for Natural Resources and Energy in METI. Mr. Minami, floor is yours.
So, thank you for coming today. So, good morning, everyone. It is a great honor for me to take such a speech. I am Minami, Deputy Commissioner for Energy Agency of METI. Today, I would like to introduce Japan's policy toward achieving carbon neutrality. First of all, for carbon neutrality by 2050, there are three key concepts as follows. As follows. One is various pathways. There are various pathways to achieve carbon neutrality based on country realities. Second is innovation. Innovation must be created for carbon neutrality. Third is engagement. Japan is going to engage in the decarbonization of developing countries. For these concepts, I will talk about the following agenda. As a prerequisite, let's take a look at the status of carbon neutral commitment in each country. 144 countries have pledged carbon neutrality by 2050. These countries account for 42% of the world total CO2 emissions. For reference, China, which is responsible for almost 30% of global emission, of course the biggest emitter, announced its carbon neutrality by 2060. As you know, Japan declared that we would aim to reduce GHG gas emissions to net zero by 2050. Japan is now aiming to reduce its GHG emission by 46% in 2030 from its 2013 levels. As this graph shows, we realize carbon neutrality by promoting electrification and decarbonization of electricity. The policy direction towards carbon neutrality is evident in the various strategies. Last year, Japan formulated a green growth strategy. This strategy is an industrial policy to lead the challenging goal of achieving carbon neutrality by 2050, which Japan is aiming toward the virtuous cycle of the economy and the environment. Japan introduces all policy measures, including 2 trillion yen Green Innovation Fund for supporting companies' challenges on innovation and investment decisions. Also, The new strategic energy plan was announced in this October. In this plan, main policy for 2030 is renewable energy, energy efficiency, and nuclear power. As Agenda 1, I will explain Japan's initiatives to stimulate innovation. As mentioned above, 2 trillion yen Green Innovation Fund has been established in Japan. This fund has some features, such as unprecedented scale, ambitious and specific goals, and corporate commitment. One example of the fund in the industry sector as well. Technology for producing green steel has yet to be established. Investment to research and development of the decarbonization process is also risky. For leading the global decarbonization market with high-grade steels, the public and the private sectors need to work together on R&D to decarbonize the iron-making process while maintaining the same quality as before. Innovation should also be prompted in the areas of automobiles or vehicles. EV is one of the prominent and major options to achieve this goal. At the same time, battery still faces several technological challenges. Our approach is to pursue a variety of options, ensuring technological neutrality. Competition among several technologies, such as battery, hydrogen, e-fuel, will be key driver to facilitate innovation. We also pay attention to the difference of circumstances each country faces. Considering employees related to current automobile industry, smooth transition is also important. For promoting various technological innovation, Japan takes a lead in technological innovation in the world. Japan will prepare Green Innovation Fund and invest 150 billion yen for developing next-generation batteries and motors. Furthermore, Japan will progress R&D of synthetic fuel. We believe that there are several key areas of innovation. Areas of special focus are as follows. The first one is hydrogen, fuel ammonia. Next is carbon recycling concrete. Fourth one is synthetic fuels. The last one is synthetic methane. In order to promote these efforts in Japan, Tokyo Beyond Zero Week 2021 has been held in October. The three concepts are also key for here. So, in short, various pathways, innovation, and engagement, as I mentioned before. Tokyo Beyond Zero Week 2021 invited ministers and experts from around the world. A package of Tokyo Beyond Zero Week was launched last year, and Asia Green Growth Partnership Ministerial Meeting and International Conference of Fuel Ammonia was added to the list this year. 8 consecutive international conferences were held, and about 17,000 people from 90 countries participated in a whole week. The last agenda is global engagement. You know, there are various pathways toward carbon neutrality. So it's not only one pathway. For achieving global carbon neutrality, decarbonization of developed countries is essential. In the Asia-Pacific region, IEA accepts that fossil fuel will still be an important source of supply, even if rapid shift to renewable energy occurs. Especially in Southeast Asia, where the access to electricity is still insufficient, the proportion of coal and natural gas will remain almost unchanged, IEA sees. On the other hand, in ASEAN countries, renewable energy potentials are unevenly distributed. There are only a limited number of regions where renewable energy can be introduced at low costs. Given this situation, Japan announced Asia Energy Transition Initiative, so-called AT. It includes a variety of support for the realization of various and programmatic energy transition in Asia. To support various and pragmatic energy transition in Asia, Japan will support potential energy transition technologies as follows. This concept of AT was also confirmed during the Asia Green Growth Partnership Ministerial meeting held as part of Tokyo Beyond Zero Week. METI minister delivered a video message at that time. In this message, he emphasized that Japan would provide a wide variety range of support based on the Asian Energy Transition Initiative, AT, to accelerate energy transitions in Asia. Many participants welcomed these Japan's initiatives. Through this meeting, we, Japan and other Asian countries, were able to acknowledge the need to make efforts and contributions to achieve global carbon neutrality in the earliest possible in pursuing the Paris Agreement goals. This is a very significant achievement and one answer to engagement with developing countries. Lastly, I would like to emphasize three important points again. Various pathways need to be explored to achieve global net zero. It is important to promote diverse and realistic energy transitions in line with the energy situation of each country. Innovation through R&D plays a critical role in energy transition for the use of all energy and all technologies. And lastly, it is extremely important for Japan to take actions to solve problems through engagement with developing countries. I would be very happy for you to feel sympathy with these concepts. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Minami. And from now, I will move to the QA session. So anyone who have a question on the floor, please raise your hand. Okay, if no questions, next is second part. But the second part is around, we will begin the second part at around 11 o'clock, so please wait a minute. And now we are ready to start the second part of this event. In this part, second part is a presentation session by the private companies. Now we are now inviting speakers from the private companies which are strongly promoting innovation with a view to decarbonizing Japan and by extension the world. And the first speaker is Mr. Tezuka Hiroyuki from Keidanren. Keidanren is a big Japanese business organization consisting of more than 1,000 companies. And Mr. Tezuka will present Keidanren's initiative toward carbon neutrality, explaining Keidanren's carbon neutrality action plan. Mr. Tezuka, floor is yours. He's joining by the online.
グラスゴーの皆様おはようございます。
Ladies and gentlemen in Glasgow, good morning. I am the chair of the Working Group on Global Environment Strategy, Keidanren. My name is Tezuka. In the past, I went to COP meetings almost every year, but regrettably this year I have to participate remotely from Tokyo.
私からは
I would like to talk about approaches of the Japanese industry towards carbon neutrality.
スライド1をお願いします。
Slide 1, please.
はい、はじめに経団連について簡単に。
Firstly, let me introduce Keidanren briefly. Keidanren is the largest comprehensive economic organization. Its members consist of about 1,600 major companies and associations. Our counterpart in Britain is CBI. In Japan, in collaboration with the government, we try to create a virtuous circle of economy and environment. At the same time, through B7, B20, which are business versions of G7 and G20, as well as BIAC, which is OECD's official advisory group of business, we participate proactively as the representative of the Japanese business community and involve in various global discussions, such as environment. As for COP, we send a delegation every year, but not this year, regrettably. In 1991, to illustrate our basic philosophy and code of conduct, Keidanren adopted a global environment charter. Since then, Keidanren has been independently proceeding with our contributions to the environmental issue. In particular, in the climate change area, in June 1997, when the Kyoto Protocol was yet to be adopted, we established a voluntary action plan on environment and started our independent approaches towards emission reduction. Almost 25 years on, we launched various initiatives ahead of anyone and have been achieving stable results in reducing emissions in and out of Japan. Next page, please.
そして今週8日
And on the 8th of November, which is last week, Keidanren established our goals to be achieved towards 2050 carbon neutrality and published a new independent approaches called Carbon Neutrality Action Plan. The Carbon Neutrality Action Plan was joined by 62 leading industrial bodies. There are two parts. Firstly, vision towards carbon neutrality by 2050, which is a long-term approach. And then the four-pillar approach was emission reductions by 2030, which is a mid-term approach to contribute to the global climate change measures.
計画になっております。次のページお願いします。
Next page, please.
まず一つ目のパート、2050
I
年
will talk about the first part, vision towards carbon neutrality by 2050. The Carbon Neutrality Action Plan urged participating industrial bodies to clarify their blueprint towards 2050 and their visions on technological development and social implementation. As a result, all industries replied that they have established their visions or were currently working on it or planning to do so. The CO2 emissions from industries already formulated their visions is about 90% of the total. That is, industries with large emissions already have a clear vision of reducing emissions.
次のページをお願いします。
Next page, please.
ここではその具体的な例として
I picked up steel industry and gas industry as concrete examples. As you can see, each industry formulated their vision based on their characteristics and situations.
実現していくかというビジョンを作成し、それを公表しております。
They are published. Through such approaches, the Japanese business community will make its contribution to realize carbon neutrality by 2050 as much as possible. Next page, please.
続きまして2つ目のパート
Now the second part, reducing emissions by 2030.
についてお話し申し上げます。これは日本
The Japanese business community has been working on this continuously, and there
4つの
are four pillars.
1つの柱
The
は
first pillar is emission reductions from domestic business
になります。
operations.
参加事業が
Participating industries introduced best available techniques
最大
or
限
technologies as much as possible
組んだ結果、すでに2020
from the fiscal 2013 to 2020, the CO2 emission was reduced by 22.3% in total.
ただ2020年度につきま
As
して
for
は
the fiscal 2020,
コロナウイルスの影響による
due to the COVID-19 pandemic, the economic activities was largely declined.
ただ
It is a
排出量は2013年
part of the reason, but the emission have been decreasing since the fiscal 2013.
続いておりまして、19年度時点
In
で
2019, the reduction was by 11%.
ということになります。そういう意味で新型
Therefore,
コロナウイルス
even without the pandemic, I think we would have achieved a steady reduction like this.
次のページお願いします。第2の柱として主体間連携という
The second pillar is cooperation among interested groups. That is, participating industries are
にとどまらず
not only trying to reduce emissions in their production activities, but also in the total life
全体あるいは
total life cycle,
全体を通
including use and disposal stages, or the total supply chain.
このグラフにありますように
As you can see in this graph, avoided emission is a concept.
製品あるいはリサイクル
Products or recycling or disposal
どれだけ削減に貢献できているか
are focused as well in terms of the reduction contributions. It is a comprehensive approach. Next page, please.
第3の柱は
The
国際
third pillar is international
参
contribution.
加業種は日本の優れた
Participating industries are to transfer excellent technologies and know-hows of Japan to overseas proactively.
貢献していく
Through such activities, they contribute to the emission reduction globally.
的な
As you can see, we showed some concrete examples on this slide.
これは先ほどの
Such activities
プレゼンテーションにありまし
have
たよう
been
に
touched upon by Mr. Minami.
特にアジアを中心にエネルギ
It is
ー関係の
led by the Japanese government in terms of the technology transfer and contributions in reducing reductions in other countries, and private companies are participating and
行われていくものと
working on such efforts with the government.
第4の柱は革新的技
The
術
fourth pillar is development of innovative technologies.
大幅な
In order to realize a significant reduction in GHGs,
していないような
participating industries are working on innovation and environment in environment and
そうい
energy.
う形で、貢献する、こういう取り組みを始めております。ここにいくつか具体的なその
As you can see, we listed some concrete examples of our challenges here in terms of innovation. Next slide, please.
カーボンニュートラル行動計画では
In the Carbon Neutrality Action Plan towards 2030, industries set their own reduction targets.
ここにありますような PDCA
Through the PDCA cycle, they have been making efforts to reduce emissions to achieve their goals.
経団連の第三者評価
Keidanren's third-party evaluation committee or government councils conduct strict follow-ups.
厳密なフォローアップが実施されるなど計画の信頼性
This way, we can secure the reliability and transparency of the plan.
こうした活動は実はパリ協定の中
This
核
is the same as pledge and review,
レビュー型の
which
仕組み
is
これは
the
各国が
core of the Paris Agreement.
コントリビューションを掲げそれを
Each country published NDCs,
特にグローバルストッ
and
ク
they are pledged, they are reviewed by,
実績をフォローし
they are reviewed, and through global stock taking,
実際は総じ的な形になっております。ほとんど
their
同じ
commitment will be being reviewed. And this is a process of the Paris Agreement.
の策定と
And based on the formulation of visions and
日本そして世
four
界
pillar approaches, Keidanren will make contributions to realize the global carbon neutrality. Next page, please.
以上がカーボンニュートラル行動計画
So
の
that was an overview of a carbon neutrality plan.
業界
To
単位
realize carbon neutrality,
実際に
in addition to such approaches at the industry level, but companies would have to courageously tackle with creating innovations.
こうした考えの下で
Under such philosophy,
2019年12月に
in December 2019 at COP25, Keidanren announced our Challenge Zero.
昨年の6月に
We have started this project in June 2020, last year.
次のページお願いしますこのチャレンジゼロに参加する企業
Participating
は
companies declares to deal with challenges such as development of innovative zero-emission technologies, dissemination and implementation of them, as well as finance for companies that are engaged in such challenges.
を公表します COP25 での放送発表以後
Companies will announce their concrete plans as well. Since we published our Challenge Zero, we received various interests. At the moment, 190 companies and organizations announced 400 ambitious challenges,
着実に増え
and
て
the number is increasing.
こうした具体的な個々の企業のイノベーションのチャレンジを公表共有することによって
Innovation Challenge are being shared and published.
取り
By
組み
doing
さま
so,
ざまな実例これ
various
が
approaches and
企業間で共有
cases
され
and best practices are shared by companies, which enables companies
期待
networking each other and matchmaking each other.
例えば次のページお願いし
For instance, well, next page, please.
ます例えば私
For
が
instance,
する JFE スティール
JFE Holdings, which I belong to,
とする革新的な製鉄技術を用いた
registered a challenge to develop hydrogen reduction steelmaking to achieve zero carbon steel as a challenge.
技術テーマに分けて、その概
And the challenge is published in
要
details.
をさせていただいております。そういう意味で、これは英語でも日本語でも、経団連
This website can be accessed, and you can see, read in English and in Japanese as well.
チャレンジゼロの公式
So
ウェブサイ
please
ト
have a look of our official website, Challenge Zero, for your information and reference.
以上
Next page, please. This is a very quick overview of the approaches of the Japanese business community. I hope the audience would better understand the approaches and support us, as well as work hand in hand with us to realize global carbon neutrality.
私からのご説明は
This is all from me. Thank you so much indeed.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Tezuka. The next theme is hydrogen. And hydrogen is one of the technology area in which Japanese has advantage. Here, we are inviting Mr. Iwase Junichi from ENEOS company. ENEOS is one of the Japan's leading energy companies. He will present the ENEOS hydrogen strategy or the effort to build a large-scale hydrogen supply chain. Mr. Iwase, floor is yours.
ただいまご紹介いただきました。
Thank you very much for the introduction. My name is Iwase from ENEOS. Thank you very much for the invitation. I'd like to talk to you about ENEOS's hydrogen strategy, especially around hydrogen supply chain.
はじめに ENEOS グルー
Firstly,
プでご紹介い
I'll
たします
introduce to you the ENEOS Group.
代表とする
It is Asia's leading energy and materials group.
上流の資源開
It
発
covers from upstream to downstream and product sales and recycling.
を追求
We
し
have been trying to optimize our global value chain, and over 130 plus years, all natural gases and also petrochemical materials we have been steadily supplying the world.
本格的な脱炭素の
In anticipation of a decarbonized society and toward sustainable growth,
供給の一環として
as part of next generation energy supply,
サプライチェーンや
we are working on CO2-free hydrogen supply chain and renewable energy synfuel utilizing hydrogen.
ENEOS の考える
This is ENEOS's hydrogen introduction roadmap.
足元の実証段階を
Currently, we're conducting demonstration projects, and about 2025, we will start use of hydrogen in a relatively small scale, and from about 2030, commercialization phase. And in 2050, half of domestic hydrogen demand will be supplied or covered.
当初は
Initially,
製所の中での
we will start using hydrogen within our own refineries.
段階的にこう
Then both domestic and overseas supply chain will be built up. Then power plants, steel mills, and other industries, as well as vehicles, railway vessels, and the transport sector can start benefiting from hydrogen. In order to achieve these goals,
戦略を柱に立てて
we have three strategic pillars. First one being CO2-free hydrogen supply chain. Second, large-scale hydrogen demand creation.
3つ目は水素に関する新技
Three,
術の開発
hydrogen-related new technology.
今申し上げました3つの戦略の達成のためには
In order to achieve these three, huge investment will be necessary. In Japan,
10年間で
a 10-year, 2 trillion yen Green Innovation Fund has been established.
11
And in August,
4テーマが
ENEOS's 4 demonstration projects were awarded funding.
政府からの
This kind of government assistance
民間企業にとって
is very much welcomed by private sector, including ENEOS.
さらに水素戦略を
We're determined to progress with our hydrogen strategy. With this as a tailwind.
テーマのうちまず一つ目が
Of the 4 projects, the first one is the large-scale demonstration of an MCH supply chain. CO2-free hydrogen will be produced overseas,
国内の
transported in the form of MCH
並びに
and
CO2 水素を
to Japan.
使用するとともに
initially used in our refineries, then possibly in other facilities such as power plants and steel mills. Using MCH, produce, transport, and use, the entire hydrogen supply chain will be established. And I am going to talk about this later a bit more. The second project is the direct MCH production technology. Using a direct electrosynthesis technology, which is our proprietary technology. MCS plays a role in the transport phase of hydrogen. And it's dramatically shortened the MCH gas to liquid process, thereby reducing the cost of transport. The third project is large hydrogen-fired power plant. Japan's first large-scale hydrogen-fired power plant technology is being tested using an actual equipment. This project represents the use phase of hydrogen. The fourth one was the commercialization of liquid hydrogen supply chain. In addition to MCH, transporting hydrogen in the form of liquid hydrogen will be tested with Kawasaki Heavy Industries and Iwatani Corporation. I have just introduced to you the three hydrogen strategies, but the first one of the CO2-free supply chain, for this, refineries and other existing assets should be used, and that is the key. Refineries are facing large ports, accept large tankers, piers and tanks are there. By utilizing them, initial investment for the hydrogen supply chain will be reduced. Domestic demand for oil is declining. The redundant capacity can be used for hydrogen businesses. As to hydrogen carriers, there are a number of options. However, especially the organic hydride methyl cyclohexane, or MCH, is what we are focusing on because we already have the dehydrogenation equipment. So the affinity to the oil industry is very high. The second pillar is demand creation. I'd like you to look at this map, which shows you our refineries and surrounding power plants as well as steel mills. Refineries are usually in industrial complex, and together with LNG power plants and steel mills, which are likely to benefit from hydrogen in the future. This proximity of facilities will contribute to establishing and extending a hydrogen supply chain. The third pillar of new technology development for decarbonized mobility, renewable energy-based synfuel is being R&D'd. Using renewable energy-based hydrogen and CO2 in the air, synfuel can be produced. Without increasing CO2 in the air, internal combustion engines can be decarbonized. This project has not received green innovation funding, but for liquid fuel applications such as jet fuel, this synfuel, which can utilize the existing oil infrastructure, will be very attractive. In conclusion, for hydrogen-enabled carbon neutrality, we, the oil industry, will have to lead and play the biggest role.
今後とも着実
We
に
are determined to steadily build up the hydrogen supply infrastructure.
ありがとうございます。
Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Iwase. Now I'm closing this second session, and the next part is third session. We will start the third session around or just before the 11:30. So you put some breaks. Thank you. Thank you for your waiting, and we start the final part. Third part is a discussion session. In discussion, 3 people joined the discussion in front of you. So 2 people, government official from Japan and Australia, and expert from the area. Area is the Economic Research Institute for ASEAN and East Asia. So I pass my microphone to Mr. Minami to lead the discussion. Minami-san, please.
So everyone, thank you for coming today to Japan Pavilion. The tour Japan's initiative toward carbon neutrality. Thank you very much. And today I am the moderator of this discussion. My name is Minami from Energy Agency METI. So today the very great participants from Mr. Low, DISCR from Australia. Thank you for coming today. And also the other guest is Professor Alima from area. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So actually today I would like to have a very intensive discussion among 3 of us. So I would like to discuss the energy transition in Asia, and also I would like to discuss how to engage with global carbon neutrality in the future. So I have a first question to Mr. Low. So I would like to ask you about what kind of actions we need in order to materialize the carbon neutrality in Asia-Pacific region. So please give me comment.
Yeah, thank you. And first I just want to say thank you so much for having me here today. It's an absolute pleasure. We work really closely with our Japanese colleagues, so it's a wonderful thing to be a part of this event. So thank you for having us. I think for Australia, we place a really, really high value on our economic and strategic partnerships with our partners in the region, and Japan is a great example of that. We take a lot of pride in our long-standing trade and economic relationship, particularly in building and supporting some of those global, energy and mineral supply chains, and we see a really strong future there going into the future. I think, in answer to your question, I think climate change is a global problem, and it's going to take solutions that work globally. In Australia, we're absolutely focused on driving down the cost of low emissions technologies to cost parity. I think once we get that cost parity with alternatives, we see that as a really cost-effective way to make the energy transition possible, and that's particularly important to the Asian region, I think. And I think it was really good to see that reflected in the Glasgow Breakthroughs agenda that the UK presidency led and that was announced earlier here at COP. I think the availability of these technologies at a cost-effective point is going to be vital to delivering emissions reduction while maintaining that energy security and affordability. And Australia's got a really key role we can play there in making those technologies more affordable, so that our partners, including Japan and others in the Asia-Pacific, don't have to choose between emissions reduction and prosperity. And I think that's the core of the challenge here. So last week, very excitingly, and some colleagues of mine worked very closely on it, we launched our 2021 Low Emissions Technology Statement, and this is the second statement or milestone in our technology investment roadmap. And at the core of that element, that is the core element of our plan to get to net zero emissions by 2050. In addition to the technologies we announced in our last year's roadmap, things like clean hydrogen, low emission steel, I think a really exciting new priority that the Australian government has announced is to get the cost of solar down even further, around another 2/3 down to around $15 per megawatt hour Australian, which is around $11 US per megawatt hour. And we think that's absolutely vital, to reducing electricity emissions, ensuring affordability of that, but also unlocking a lot of the potential of renewables in driving down the things of cost like clean hydrogen, particularly green hydrogen as we often talk about, but also things like low emission steel and aluminium. Through the roadmap, we're expecting to invest over sort of $20 billion in these technologies over the decade of 2030, and I think that investment from an Australian point of view is something that we can really do to help bring down those costs. And we know this model works because we've seen it firsthand with solar in Australia. So now we're more than 1 in 4 households have solar energy. I think that growth has been rapid. We've got more wind and solar per person than any country outside of Europe, which we're really proud of. But we want to do more. And I think, over the decade 2030, we're expecting to hit maybe around 60% renewables, which is a big achievement for a country that's traditionally had a lot of sort of coal-fired generation. But I think no country can do this alone. And for us, international collaboration is a really key part of that. And that's actually sort of my main job with the Australian government, is developing our international partnerships. And we are partnering and co-investing. We've committed more than $565 million to these international partnerships. And it's an absolute pleasure to be here because one of those really exciting partnerships is with Japan. So our 2 prime ministers announced the partnership on decarbonisation through technology in June this year. So it's a pleasure to be here because I worked on that very closely. I think that builds on some of that great success we've had through things like, the hydrogen energy supply chain project in Victoria, which I understand is about to sort of launch its first shipment of liquefied hydrogen to Japan, which is a great milestone and a really important one. And I think that these partnerships underscore how Australia thinks about its role in this energy transition. Not only do we want to reduce our own emissions and drive down the cost of those technologies, but we see a really important role for us in helping the region and indeed globally to decarbonise through, almost sort of embedding our renewable energy and exporting it. And hydrogen's a really obvious one, but also things like iron ore and alumina, world's largest producer of iron ore. It's a really important part of our economy. And to do that, these things aren't just going to happen by themselves. That's why the government's investing so heavily, and we've, set aside $1.2 billion to drive that clean hydrogen industry, including $464 million for our clean hydrogen industrial hubs, which are trying to sort of, and I think ENEOS talked about it a little bit in their slide about trying to bring together demand cases and producers of hydrogen and users of it to sort of drive up the scale and bring down the cost. And we've seen that in renewables, and we know that's a really good way to advance these technologies. I think Australia as a developed nation, and Japan very similarly, I think a key thing for us is that we want our developing partners in our region to be a part of this transition and to realise those opportunities as well. And private finance, low emission technology transfer, particularly in our region, these are going to be really important in delivering on the goals of the Paris Agreement. To do that, Australia is doubling its commitment to climate finance up to sort of $2 billion over 2020, 2025, which is up from the $1 billion pledge in the sort of preceding 5 years. And this commitment for us is a part of our long-term relationship with our partners in the region, particularly in the Pacific, and we want them to adapt, to become more resilient to climate change and the effects of that, but also assist them in their transition to economies, to a cleaner energy future. And again, that's where the affordability and price of some of these technologies comes in, because that's really important to their prosperity. I think we're also working with some of our partners in the region, and I want to continue that, making sure they can access those new technologies and that they're building resilience to those climate impacts. So like Japan, we see a really strong role for high integrity carbon offsets and getting to net zero. I think that sort of has to be a part of the discussion, and that's why, we're working with Indo-Pacific, and we've heard that that they want to access these carbon markets, and and build their capacity in carbon and counting to further their own domestic agendas. So earlier this year, we announced $60 million for our Indo-Pacific carbon offset scheme. We've recently, during COP here, we've increased that to $104 million and extended the length of it to 10 years. And this scheme is about demonstrating commercial viability, tangential benefits, tangible community benefits, and a real flow of conservatively estimated carbon offsets for the region. And we think this is about boosting the region's ability to attract private investment in some of these projects and things that matter to them, like blue carbon and other things, but also in developing nature-based solutions. So yeah, I think at the core of it, partnerships is a really important one for us. As is sort of building resilient and diverse energy ecosystems, making sure that we embed emissions reduction, affordability, and reliability at the core of that.
Thank you very much, Mr. So your explanation is very comprehensive and future-looking. So your comment is very helpful for Japan and the Asia-Pacific region. Actually, Australia has been a very important country for Japanese energy stability. And based on your comment, I believe that Australia will be the important country for Japan and Asia-Pacific region. Thank you very much. Thank you. So next, Professor Arima. So I would like to listen to your idea about what kind of actions we need to make a steady transition of Asia-Pacific to carbon neutrality.
Thank you very much, Mr. Minami, and good morning, everybody. It is great to be here as the presenter from AREA. AREA is an economic research institute of ASEAN and East Asia. It is something like a regional think tank, and we are periodically conducting energy outlook with particular focus on ASEAN countries. Please turn to the next slide. The next one, please. Yes, the left side, you can see the BAU, business as usual scenario of the primary energy mix from now to 2050. And the right one is more ambitious scenario, alternative policy scenario, taking into account more ambitious energy efficiency program and also renewable energy promotion. But comparing these two programs, still you see a very much high share of fossil fuels in the total primary energy supply towards 2050. Next one, please. The situation is very much similar in the power generation. And again, the left side, you see very much higher share of fossil fuels out of total power generation, over 80%. And even under alternative policy scenario, it is still a bit over 70%. And taking into that account, please turn to the next one. The trends of the CO2 emissions of ASEAN countries presented in green seems to be continuously rising towards 2050. And of course, this outlook was formulated before COP26. And as you know, such countries as Indonesia and Vietnam and Singapore, Thailand, they are putting forward their own carbon neutrality goals towards 2060 or 2065 and so on. But the point is how to implement that carbon neutrality goals. The next one, please. And to help their consideration, our organization, in collaboration with IEJ, is conducting low-carbon energy transition scenarios. That is something like a simulation of cost-optimal deployment of energy technologies under technical cost constraint. For example, by setting 2050 as a goal of carbon neutrality or 2060 or whatever, and then you can present the optimal mix of various technologies, including solar PV, offshore wind, onshore wind, hydro, geothermal, biomass, nuclear, CCUS, hydrogen, ammonia, DACs, and BECCS, based on various assumptions such as carbon pricing and cost reduction potential of various renewable energy technologies and renewable potential in this region, and ASEAN power grid development, and also hydrogen production and import potential, and finally annual CO2 capacity, storage capacity. Then next one, please. And this is indicative outcome, assuming that ASEAN region as a whole is going to achieve 2050 carbon neutrality. Then left side baseline and right side net zero emission 2050. There is a radical difference of the energy mix in the total primary energy supply. You see much lower share of oil, natural gas, and coal, and much higher share of hydro, geothermal, solar, wind, biomass, and hydrogen and ammonia. And that difference is more acute in the power generation on the right side. Again, comparing baseline and net zero emissions, you see significant share of, say, hydro and hydrogen and solar power and wind and biomass and hydrogen and so on. So, but the lessons we have got from this analysis is next one, please. That the next one, please. The energy saving and electrification are the two major components for decarbonization of this region. And not only variable renewables, that is quite often advocated, but all the carbon-free technologies, including hydro, geothermal, biomass, nuclear, can contribute to carbon neutrality. And also CO2-free hydrogen supply, CCS negative emission technologies are also very important. So ASEAN countries cannot be so much selective. They have to utilize all the options available. And then the transition period, various kinds of low carbon technologies, maybe not complete decarbonization, but low carbon technologies can also be important for pragmatic pathways. So power sector fuel switching from coal to natural gas, deployment of more efficient turbines, co-firing with hydrogen, ammonia, and fossil fuel power with CCS. That kind of, the transitional approach is very important, and affordable technologies in the midterm is very important in order to facilitate the energy transition. And cost reduction and international cooperation, as pointed out by Ro, is quite important for the affordable decarbonization, because affordability matters a lot for this region. Next one, please. And this is very interesting, the comparison of the country's priority on 17 SDGs. At Sweden, where Greta Thunberg is coming from, not surprisingly, the climate action is receiving the first priority. But in China, climate action priority is 15 out of 17 SDGs. And also for Indonesia, 9th out of 17 SDGs. So with that in mind, please go to the next. And quite recently, at the end of October, the ASEAN East Asia Summit meeting was held. And this is an excerpt from the chairman's statement on energy. And he emphasized the promotion of innovative technologies and low-carbon societies, including hydrogen, carbon recycling, and carbon capture, utilization, storage, and no single pathway to achieve a low-carbon economy. But rather, there are diverse pathways for each country. And we emphasize the need to explore a variety of options and utilize all fuels and all technologies to ensure a secure and stable supply of energy for achieving economic growth. So I think we should not be so much picky and choosy. We should make use of all the available technologies for decarbonization. And first, low carbon future, and eventually decarbonization. That is a very much pragmatic step. And we need to face that Asian energy reality and hopefully reflect that kind of discussion in this folder, COP16, where people tend to focus too much on only renewable and only energy efficiency is a solution. But actually, that does not fit with the Asian energy reality. So thank you. That's all from my side.
Professor Arima, thank you very much. I think that it's a very big effort to make this report. Actually, I read this all, and this report includes very deep insight, and also this report shows the difficulty to decarbonize the Asian region. But at the same time, Asian countries need to be decarbonized in the future. It's now they are facing very difficult situation, I think. Thank you very much, Professor Arima. So, okay, so we heard very insightful ideas from two of you. So, again, so I would like to hear from you about more concrete action for the first step to Asian decarbonization in next, so for example, for next 10 years. So please, Mr. Professor Arima.
Yeah, thank you very much. And we need to recognize that there are many, how can I say, existing, say, fossil fuel thermal power plants, and their vintage are still young. So you cannot, say, request Asian countries to close those thermal power plants overnight. So perhaps we could consider first to say promote co-firing with ammonia and so on to reduce carbon footprint from existing thermal power plants. And in parallel, we need to say develop CCUS technologies because in this Asian context, we cannot, how can I say, completely negate the existence of fossil fuel thermal plants. So how to neutralize CO2 emissions, then CCUS is quite important. So we very much welcome Japan's initiative, and area is also supporting that. It is, we have established CCUS network for exchanging experience and promote joint project and so on CCUS. And actually, there are a lot of storage potential in ASEAN region for storing CO2. So I think in the short term, we can say promote co-firing of ammonia and also perhaps biomass as well for reducing CO2 emissions. And to mid to long term, we can develop CCUS, and hopefully we could develop some demonstration project in this region so that CCUS can make a big difference to the CO2 footprint. So that is the pragmatic path. And of course, we can support the full exploration of renewable energy potential in this region, because this region can enjoy a very good sunshine. And then depending on the situation, solar power can provide a very, very cost-effective solution for decarbonization in this region. So again, we need to mobilize all the available options here.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Professor Arima. So, you have a comment?
I think looking at the solar industry is a really interesting parallel. From sort of those really promising earlier R&D of solar cells back in, say, the 1970s, it took a very long time for that to sort of get to commercial readiness. You're talking 30, 40 years before, you're seeing a huge growth in deployment, and we are seeing a huge growth now, particularly in Australia, but other countries, and that's really promising. So I think the challenge for us in an immediate sense is identify what those technologies we're going to need to get to net zero, so to identify where they are and what the pathway is to get them down to an affordability. As was discussed, that's really important, particularly for our Asian region. So I think in terms of our immediate priorities, that identification, prioritization, and investment in accelerating that is really promising. And you are seeing, I think a lot of really promising development, things like battery storage, how quickly they're coming along, gives me a lot of hope that we can achieve similar progress in some of these other areas. I think the other sort of side of it, and obviously hydrogen's a big priority for us, but also a big priority for the relationship we have with Japan, is investing in those pilot demonstration projects, but also building the market around these things and building the demand case. And I think things like co-firing of ammonia are great because you can reduce that capital outlay up front and make sure that we're sort of finding those demand cases and building the supply chain. But I think consumer confidence in these technologies and in the credibility of them is going to be really, really key. So the Australian government's doing some work on guarantee of origin schemes around hydrogen, because there's a lot of debate sometimes around green and blue hydrogen, and I think that the important thing that we can all agree is that what actually matters is the cost of it, but also the emissions that are embedded within it. And I think understanding that and making sure that consumers and countries can make informed decisions about that are really important. So we're doing doing some work, in Australia, in the Australian government on that, but we're also working with our international partners like Japan and others through international fora to build those standards and those common ways of accounting, because I think that's a really key element here in terms of those initial actions, because ultimately governments, aren't going to be able to do this alone. They need private investment, and to do that we need markets that function well.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. So thank you for very informative and insightful ideas. So we are learning and studying what you mentioned today, and then we are going to take advantage of what you mentioned today. Yeah, actually, so this is. I would like to wrap up this in this meeting. So as I mentioned before, that there are various pathways to carbon neutrality. So Japan has Japan's pathway, and Thailand has Thailand's pathway, and also Australia has Australian pathways. So, but what we would like to always in mind is the goal is carbon neutrality. All countries has to aim for carbon neutrality. So, and so we need good innovation, including CCUS and hydrogen and ammonia, which both of you mentioned. And also, Asian countries need financial support from developed countries like Australia and Japan. So Japan and Australia has to engage with Asian countries. So I think Asian countries are facing very tough period, actually, but with support from Japan and Australia and other developed countries, we have to encourage them to be decarbonized in the future. Thank you very much. Thank you for coming today. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for all three experts. And today the time is already running out. So I'd like to close this event. But before closing, I appreciate for all participants here and participants by online. So finally, I'd see you next time, and have a great day in Glasgow.